I thought I could build this up in 5 years to replace my salary. That was kind of my goal.
That's Emily Beatty, who began investing in real estate, left her job, had a baby, and replaced her job salary in 7 years using 7 properties.
And once I decided that, I bought 2 burrs right away, and 3 months after that, put tenants in them and got my money back. And then I was like, okay, this is going to work.
In this episode, you're going to hear Emily's full story, including some of the struggles they went through while growing their rental portfolio.
You buy a property and then you feel really broke for a little bit, and then you kind of have to find a way to kind of kick money back into gear.
And why they decided to have a small and mighty portfolio instead of buying more and more units.
Wow, if I could own $4 million properties, get all of those paid down, and the cash flow on them is going to be substantially higher.
And now we're going to dig into all of that and more. So Emily, there's a story that so many investors, I think, have where either it's a moment or maybe a few months where they decide that they need a big change. Something's got to shift. And I would love to go back to your story. And my understanding is back when you're in the design field and I assume you're not unhappy with your job, but you're like, all right, something's got to change. So let's start there. Tell me about your kind of that pre-real estate investing when you're thinking about life shifts, life goals, and where you wanted to go.
Yeah, so my husband and I both are designers. So we are in, the deadline-based world is what I would call it. Like sometimes weeks are slow and then other times weeks are crazy busy. So we would find ourselves in this position where both of us were working really late periodically, and it was fairly unpredictable when that would be because it was completely project-based. So as we were getting older and starting to think about, do we want to have a family? What are we going to do? How is the work-life balance going to shift when we decide to take that leap? I just started thinking, one of us is going to have to take a little step back here, or something's got to give if we want to give time to another person. So that got me just starting diving into reading books and listening to podcasts really about more just general entrepreneurship. I thought, oh, maybe I'll start a business. Maybe I'll do something like that on the side. And I knew I wanted a couple years of runway before we decided to, move our family into this new phase. So I just started kind of diving into lots of books and articles and anything I could get my hands on to just kind of brainstorm and figure it out. So I kind of fell into real estate, reading a few books, and I read The 4-Hour Workweek, and I think there's a little bit of real estate stuff in there. Got into the Kiyosaki book, and
you went down the rabbit hole.
Went down the whole rabbit hole, and just my mom's a real estate agent. She works full-time for an investor now, managing his couple hundred properties. So I just started thinking, about what she's doing, and it kind of all just fell into this, oh, I got to start buying real estate, and then stumbled onto Bigger Pockets and just kind of dove in to all the forums there back in 2017 and just started eating it up for about a year. And then about a year into it, I said, okay, I'm burning myself out on research. I got to go do something. So it was 2018. I just kind of dove in and said, I'm just going to find a property, called my mom up in Kentucky where I could afford to buy. I was living in California at the time with my husband. We had just paid off all our student debt with kind of the Dave Ramsey method, just one loan at a time, just getting it all knocked out. And found ourselves debt free around that time. And I said, okay, what now? What are we going to do now? Getting the itch to kind of put money somewhere and park it. So called my mom in Kentucky and I said, I want to buy a small multifamily property in Kentucky. Can you help me? And she said yes. And so we just started looking then in 2018, and interest rates were 5% then for investments. And it felt really hard at the time. I was like, ooh, this is going to be tight. Things felt hard then. But little did we know where we'd be now,
Right.
So we just kind of snowballed into buying our first property, and it was occupied by a couple Section 8 tenants who had been there for a long time, but the numbers still worked. So we just dove in and bought it. And those tenants stayed until we sold that property just recently. But so those same tenants stayed. It was one of the easiest properties I've ever owned. It was a base hit, as they would say. We didn't make a ton of cash flow when we were owning it throughout the ownership, but we started to see this slow equity build. And that's when I started to, like, it was like 2 years into there, I was like, wow, maybe the equity is like the real winner here, is what I started thinking. So we actually started switching into another area of investing a couple years later in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I went to school. But we kind of found places to invest in where we felt like we had an edge of knowledge, and knew a lot of people. Um, and that was kind of what helped us make decisions more quickly to move ahead and not get stuck, I feel like.
That was my next question, because just another piece of context, you might have mentioned this earlier, but you and your husband are living in the Bay Area, right? So you're in Oakland
Yes.
or somewhere, and so you're renting. So far you've paid off your student debt, which is a huge accomplishment, and then you're renting a property, but your first purchase of a property was not even your first home, right? It was your
Right.
investment property in Kentucky. And I'm
Yes.
wondering for you, I mean, the psychology of that. I talked to so many people who are in that same stage where they're studying, they're listening to podcasts, they kind of get the concept, but there seems to be like this gulf between concept in your head and actually going forward and putting a down payment and finding a property and being confident about the market where you're going. Could you talk a little bit more about that step? Because that first deal especially is a pretty difficult leap to make for a lot of people.
Yeah, and some of it for us, we were renters in California at the time. We were in a little one-bedroom apartment in Oakland, California, paying, $1,800 a month for that one bedroom and just kind of living our little life there. It was very simple. The bills were simple. And we knew we were almost bought a house when we before we moved to the Bay Area. We were living in Atlanta. That's where we went to college. We could afford to buy there. And we were at this cusp when we were living in Atlanta where we were either going to buy a house and settle down then, or my husband had this job opportunity in the Bay Area. We were going to take a few years and like make this leap and take a risk. So we chose the risk route, and we did not become homeowners in 2015 when we were first planning to be homeowners, when we could afford to buy in Atlanta, still saddled with student debt at the time. But so then we took that risk 3 years prior, and then we were sitting in the Bay Area saying, we've been here for a few years. We thought we'd be leaving by now, but now we're not. And we can't afford to buy here. What are we going to do next with our money? Because we had a lot of savings kind of building up at that time because we were doing that Dave's Ramsey stuff when paying off the debt. And then it was like we just kept going. It kind of became like this addiction, of like, oh my God, how much can we save now? What are we going to do now? So it really kind of catapulted us into what's next. And then we started thinking, okay, well, if we can't buy here, where are we going to buy? If we don't know that we're going to be here long term, it didn't make sense because we knew we would leave the Bay Area at some point. We just didn't know when that would be or how we would leave, financially speaking. So we pegged a couple areas we knew we were really familiar with, and that was Kentucky and Georgia. That was where my husband and I grew up. So he grew up in Georgia, I grew up in Kentucky. So we said, okay, it's really affordable in both of these places. We can start in one and see where we get, because the barrier to entry was so much lower. Even in Kentucky, I think it was a bit lower than Georgia. So we just said, well, let's just start there, because my mother was also a real estate agent there. So it was really pointful thinking of like, where do we have a little leg up on just like anyone else, And that was something that we felt like really strongly about. And also the idea that when we go back home to visit our families, those flights, we could write them off somehow through the business and kind of do some finagling of like, okay, well, we're always going to go check on our properties here. It would make sense to do that for taxes as well. So it just kind of was like, what's going to make sense? And we started really low. That first property we bought, we saved $50,000 up to put down on that. We ended up I think we closed with like 45,000 out of pocket, and we had, maybe an extra 20,000 in our savings account at that time for like buffer, for this to really just have some runway. And we knew these tenants were in long term and we wouldn't have to do anything for a little while besides deal with Section 8 inspections that happened. every other year, essentially, in that state. And it just hit all our criteria. That property did.
Yeah.
So we just dove into where we could afford, and we just took a leap of faith, really. And I did a year of reading. I read for a long time, and I just felt there was nothing else I could learn until I just jumped into it. And we just took a leap of faith, and my husband just was on board and totally trusted that this was a good route for us. And a lot of it came down to communication between he and I too, and making sure we both agreed that this was the path we wanted to be on as well. It wasn't like one really wanted to do it and had to convince the other. It was like we kind of really did a lot of research and made sure we were on the same page too, which is important, I think, when you're a married couple jumping into this. If you're trying to convince your partner to do it, you could have some stumbling blocks as well.
Yeah, I think the couple dynamic is something not talked about enough, but I'd be curious for you guys. It sounds like you and Eric you're on the same page, but it seems like in every couple, there's typically one person, like Dave Ramsey calls it the nerd. There's the nerd who does the spreadsheets, and then there's the other person who's like, okay, yeah, I'm good with it. How did, and my understanding is you took the lead on this. You were like more the, hey, I'm going
Yes.
to look for the properties. I'm going to manage this process. And then how did you see that dynamic evolving? Like, was it just something you're like, hey, I just like this idea and I'm the one who should be doing this? Or maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you took the lead between you and Eric.
I think his job definitely was a bit busier than mine. He maybe had a hobby or two more than me at the time, so this kind of turned into my hobby. It seemed natural because we chose the place where I grew up, I think, as well, and so I kind of naturally took the reins in that way. And I was working alongside my mother in Kentucky too, and she and I had a pretty good trust relationship as well. So I think a lot of it came down to I had a little bit more time than him. I wouldn't say a lot, but a little.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got this fire in me, once I started reading. And he, was on board and trusted me, but he started reading a little bit after me, I think, when I started handing him my books and saying, okay, your turn, go read this now. See what you think. Like, am I crazy here, or is this tangible? And so he came on board a little bit mentally later than I did, I think, as well. And I think we said, well, let's just buy one property and like see if we have proof of concept. So I kind of naturally, I think, based on location, kind of took over. And then I just became really excited about it. And it kind of hit a little closer to my industry as well. Like, I was working with contractors on high-rise building construction at the time. So doing a couple of houses on the side, like we did a couple of burrs after that, in Frankfort, Kentucky, it was just really natural for me to do that. And it just seemed really quick and easy. Like, I could churn out finishes on a single family home that needed like a cosmetic, overhaul in 24 hours. It was just that easy for me after systemizing from doing the larger commercial construction projects. So a lot of this just felt like, oh, well, I already have a system for this that I do at my job. I'll just, dumb it down a little bit and like do it faster with residential.
I want to try to summarize a couple things just outside looking in. If somebody else is listening to this, particularly people who are long distance trying to do something similar to what you and Eric have done, is that number one, you looked at places that you had some sort of edge in terms of knowledge or relationships. In your case, your mom was a real estate agent there. What a natural fit to try to do your first deal where somebody you trust and know pretty well who's in the industry. So like that made a ton of sense. I also like how you went for a base hit on your first deal. Like a lot of people they hear about the burst strategy, or they hear about, really advanced seller financing and, no money down and things like that, which, it's pretty cool to talk about. It makes a good podcast episode headline. But for most of us, the vanilla, put a down payment, just get into the deal. It was more or less a turnkey type property, I assume. Like you didn't have to do a lot of work.
Yeah. It just sat there and had tenants.
All right. So there's a lot to learn as it is. I mean, doing your first deal has so many new things. So I love that you walked before you ran. And then the third part was you leveraged your personal balance sheet, like not just your financial balance sheet, but your like skills that you have project management experience, you have design experience, you're good with, with the details and the numbers. And so you start looking at properties as you grew. So fast forward here a little bit, you kind of doubled down and did more of what you did on the first deal by looking into remodel projects, which you had the competitive advantage of being able to do that and pick materials and pick designs. So all of that, I think that's is every like path seems different to me, but I think that's makes a ton of sense that you leaned into your strengths, you leaned into locations, and that could be hard. I guess if some people might say, "Hey, well, I don't know anybody anywhere in the country other than where I am right now." But the common theme I see with a lot of people who've been successful in this is doing what you've done, of just like being. It's almost like a personal journey. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, like understanding yourself, what your strengths are, what your strengths aren't, and then entrepreneurship is sort of doubling down on that, and you the person are the asset more than anything, because you're the one who's going to buy these properties and manage them and remodel them, all that.
Yeah, I think sticking, like really knowing yourself and sticking to what you know is so important, and like staying the course too. It's probably taken a solid 3 to 5 years, I would say, for us to confidently say, like, this was a path that was good, this was a path that the hurdles were there and there were low points, and we made mistakes along the way, and I would tell people to do it way differently than some of the things I did when I started. But it's like the compounding over time is what makes a difference too. And just trusting that your own skills is so important, and finding a way to hone in on those, even if it's not in real estate. I'm like, anything you try to go do as an entrepreneur, like, know your skills, know what you're good at, and take some time to figure that out before you jump in. Because that is where you find your edge, and you can do something a little bit faster or more efficient or stronger than the other guy. And getting creative with that is important too. One way we got creative with that is, like, most of my properties I've found on the MLS. Some of them, I think we've done one or two with a wholesaler, but most were on the MLS, and most were just marketed wrong by the real estate agent, by the listing agent, I would say, or they stayed on for a really long time. They got a bad rap. They just needed some work, and we could negotiate in the work after they've been sitting for a little while. Or they posted what the market rents would be, and we found them to just be totally off base, on the low end. It seemed like they were under marketing it and just wanting to play it safe and not steer anybody wrong. But it was like, oh, well, if you make this room like this, the rents can actually be higher. And those were kind of things we have all these settings on the MLS, where you can, with keywords that are like flags for, like, oh, they're marketing this like a little bit funny, like single family homes that are listed as single family but maybe have separate utilities, or things like that, that people just don't market them quite right, as well.
Yeah, the details make a big difference. And what's interesting, I want to fast forward a little bit. Like you and Eric have bought, correct me if I'm wrong, total of 7 properties, 12 units. So some of these multi-unit properties, some of those were remodeling properties, but you've now kind of fast forward, like with your own career, you've now become a real estate agent. You got your license and you're doing that. You now have some short-term rentals that you manage. So you've kind of branched out from the, just doing long-term rentals with Section 8. And you both live in Atlanta. You live in town. Before we started recording, I was talking about the thing I love nerding out on is like is trails, and you've got the Beltline Trail in Atlanta. You live near that. So let's talk about that, sort of that evolution from beginning of the story. You're working in corporate world, you're managing big, huge projects. You're now, own properties in Kentucky, and you all live in Atlanta. You have a family now. Like, tell me just how that's transformation has felt for you. And then I want to ask some questions about the details of what you're doing now and what your portfolio looks like now.
Yeah, so getting from California to back to Georgia, where we met, my husband and I met in college here in Atlanta. Um, we stayed in California from 2015 to 2021, I think it was. So a little over 6 years we were there. And part of the way we kind of ventured back east was, during the pandemic when remote work started. My husband's job went remote, and we were able to kind of keep him remote at his job in California for a year after we moved back here. So I had my daughter in 2019. I'll back up a little bit. And that was kind of my biggest aha moment. Like that was when it was like to work or staying in the industry I was in and maybe trying to go part-time for a little while. So the big turning point was when I hit maternity leave, and my daughter was like, I think 6 weeks old or so. And we just decided we were going to buy another property while I was on maternity leave, and we were just going to do it. So I flew to Kentucky with my 6-week-old daughter and just started looking at houses with my mom and just saying, what are we going to buy next? And just had her with me and just was visiting family and kind of double teaming it with family. And, but I took her by myself. My husband was still working in California then. And we looked at a house and saw the house next door was for sale. The house we were looking at didn't work. We said, oh, well, look at that over there. It's for sale. So we went in next door, and that house was great. We had a way we could rent it out to people in college in the local school there. It was in Lexington, so the University of Kentucky needed a lot more housing, and they still do. But so we found a way that, okay, if we rent this to students, we can get a little bit more, and it'll be cheaper for them than when they're on campus too. So it was kind of like walking that line as well. So we bought that house with my daughter in tow then. And that was my moment. I took her with me and bought a house, and I said, I'm not going back to work. I'm done with this. Why would I go back to work? I said, I'm going to take the other money we have saved and buy this house, see the cash flow a little bit. And we decided I was just going to we were going to take a hit on my salary for a little bit if that was the choice we made. So that was a decision we had to make. But ultimately, I thought I could build this up in 5 years to replace my salary. That was kind of my goal. It was like 3 to 5 years. I want to build this up to where my salary is replaced. And I thought I could do it. So that was the choice we made then. And once I decided that, I bought 2 burrs right away. And 3 months after that, put tenants in them and got my money back. And then I was like, okay, this is going to work. So that was 2 other duplexes in Kentucky. So we had 3 duplexes and a single family home in Kentucky by the beginning of 2020. And then, March 2020 hit, the world changed. Our perspective started to shift a little bit. We were all in the state of Kentucky at that time. And then we said, okay, now we maybe need to leave here. How are we going to do that? So we started then diving into the Georgia network of investments then. And I had to start building up all my interviewing managers, talking to investors, networking there. That all began in 2020 in tandem with getting my real estate license in California to kind of build up our income a little bit there. So I got my real estate license in California and started selling houses there so that we could buy at a little bit higher price point here in Atlanta as well. And then that led to doing some sales in California for about a year and a half and buying our first investment in Atlanta 3 months after the pandemic started, when everybody was very, very nervous. And they kind of thought we were a little bit cuckoo for buying, the most expensive property we've bought in Atlanta that had been on the market for about 300 days. So our friends were looking at us like, are you crazy? What are you doing? Why are you buying houses? There's a pandemic going on. So we did that and said, okay, we're going to find our path back to Atlanta now for sure. But it's going to be we took another year to kind of get back. So we bought a duplex in Atlanta that we knew we wanted to house hack in, because we were fully expecting my husband to have to change to a job here in Atlanta and have his salary cut in half when we got here. So my job was, how are we going to slash our expenses enough to where we can be here and be closer to family and, not have our family or the grandparents flying across the country during a pandemic to see their only grandbaby. So that became the motivation then. Like, what are we going to do to let our family see us? And how are we going to live if we have to cut our expenses in half all of a sudden? So that's how we kind of got into the Atlanta market, was we have to find a house hack so that we can get back here to live a life with our family.
It's fun to see that interplay, Emily, of the your personal motivations with your career, with your family, with your daughter coming, with the grandparents. Like those are all, your why is always like the center of the, that's what your heart kind of tugs you in a certain direction. At least it does for me too. And then, but it's also fun to see the tools that you talked about, house hacking. You talked about the BRRRR strategy. You talked about finding value add where you can like, change something about the property, rent to a different type of tenant. Like all these are tactics, which are so much fun to like get into the tactics. But then you're also, what I really like about your story is the interplay of that and just your life. Like this is our life, and this is those are tools to make your life happen, which I think is so cool about entrepreneurship and real estate. You're a real estate entrepreneur as a real estate licensee. Like I want to ask about that too, by the way, about the interplay of investing and having a license. But
Mm-hmm.
to me, like that's been my whole story too. Like 21 years, this is how I want to live my life. How can I do that and kind of be outside the box in the professional world? And it's not always easy. There's not a what do you call it, like a net below you, a safety net always to catch you. You have to go out and perform. But it sounds like for you is buy those rental properties in Kentucky, build your confidence, pull your cash back out, show yourself you could do it. And those are kind of long-term investments. The house hack was a way to reduce your expenses. And then the real estate agency was a way to generate some extra income. And so maybe could you talk about that? Could you talk about the kind of the interplay of the active side where you have to generate income just to live, and then this long-term kind of horizon? Because from when you started to now is 7 years, and things have
Mm-hmm.
happened pretty fast. But in between there, you had to like make income and survive and do all that.
Yeah, so we definitely were kind of thinking, okay, there's this push and pull, I feel like, throughout the years where we've been doing this, where it's like, okay, you buy a property and then you feel really broke for a little bit, and then
Right.
you kind of have to find a way to kind of kick money back into gear. So I feel like ever since I got my license in 2020, I feel like there's been this a little push and pull of like, okay, I kind of have to mentally tell myself the focus right now is investing, and or the focus right now is working with clients. um, and sometimes I find that, to my detriment a little bit, I've sometimes get a little distracted with one or the other when I maybe shouldn't be. But there's definitely this balance that has to be struck. A lot of everything that I've found in our life with money and time and doing what we want to do has to do with like conscious awareness of balance. How are we going to strike the balance? What balance do we want right now, too? Because the busyness and the money you're making and the money you're not making, sometimes you need to be making more money at certain points, and then other points in your life you can take a step back because you've harvested, you've made the money, and now it's time to take a second. And we're really just now in our big harvest moment. Like while I'm talking to you, last 4 weeks or 6 weeks or so, we're in a harvested moment, I feel like. But the balance is the most important thing to me, I think, and just keeping awareness of that. So as I'm helping clients, I have to keep my awareness, of who's telling, like, I have clients who tell me, oh, I want to buy in 6 months. And I have a lot of clients who work with me because of my history with the house hacking, or with, um, you know, planning to buy a house and rent it out later. If you want to plan to buy a house and rent it out later, it's really great if you think about doing that on the front end when you buy it, with that intent. Is this a 2-year house or a 5-year house? If you want to be in it for 2 years and then rent it out, great. How much do you think it's going to rent for in 2 years? If you think you're going to be in 5 years, how much do you think it's going to rent for in 5 years? It's great to think about that when you buy it, right? So we sit and talk. I have a lot of conversations with my clients about that as well. So really, it's that plan is always churning in your head, of
Yeah.
that balance of when do I need to make money and when can I pull back? Because when you give yourself those moments to pull back too, you avoid the burnout. You avoid the resentment with yourself within the career, which is what I wasn't able to do in the full-time job. In the full-time job, the burnout was always there because I was answering to somebody else. And it always felt like the more I got done, the more I got handed. There was never any benefit for that harvest moment. The harvest moment was, here's more to harvest. Here's the next thing. I just need you to do more. Whereas in my personal life with my family, I can have that harvest and I can say, okay, now I'm going to take a summer with my daughter and take her to the pool every day. That's what I want to do. That's what's important right now. Now that we've had that minute of harvest, so to me, that push and pull and balance that you can strike, like you can work a lot for a few years and then not work for a few months or 1 year or whatever you need, because that's how you enjoy life now. And we thought we wanted to be FI, and now I don't think we do, because really, with FI, you become dependent on the specific income, and the income tends to shift as the years go by. Your expectations shift as years go by, and I think FI has some flaws in that way. You think there's an end game and then you hit it and then it's like, oh, well, maybe, or you have another kid or something else happens and FI doesn't work anymore. You have to go back. So keeping that expectation that like, oh, sometimes I work a lot and sometimes I don't, um, is a different perspective, I think, to have.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up, because to me, what's been fun talking to you and Eric and your story inside of rental property mastery is just getting to see that ebb and flow that I've experienced that too. Like my whole career has been a series of seasons, basically. Like you plant, you really work hard, you weed the garden, and then you harvest, and then you take a break, and you have these mini retirements, or you just spend time with your kids, or you spend time with yourself, or whatever that is. And if you're up for it, I'd love to talk some of the details of this latest season you and Eric have been in. Of you have your properties up in Kentucky, you've got a couple properties in Atlanta as well, you got your house hack, so you've built this plateau, you planted these seeds, the seeds have grown, things are good, and you were, maybe you could talk about the fork in the road, because you had the opportunity to sell some properties in Kentucky to come into some money. So maybe talk a little bit about where you were with that, what your decision was like, and what you ultimately decided to do.
In the fall of last year, we had two Airbnbs going. We had moved out of a house hack in Atlanta that we'd first bought. We thought we'd be there way longer than we were. And then we just started pounding the pavement looking for our next investment, not knowing that we didn't know what we were going to do with it yet. We just knew we were ready to buy something else. And we were living in the house hack in Atlanta for very cheap. I think we're living there for like $600 or $800 a month or something, which is great. It was right in the middle of town, in Midtown, great schools, all of that, for my daughter. So we thought we'd be there at least till she was in like 5th grade through elementary. And then we started looking, and there just started to become these higher end duplexes coming up in a neighborhood adjacent to us that was a little bit out of our reach realistically, unless we house hacked. So we decided to move from our first house hack into another house hack that was double the value of the house hack we were in then. So we knew we'd be spending more money to live in the next house hack. But what we also knew was, one, we could afford the payments, even if there was nobody next door, which was important to us. It would be a stretch, but we knew we could do it, and we could always buckle down and figure it out. But then the other layer to that was, this house hack felt like we could just make it really solid if we decided to leave as well. And it was gutted to this. It's a 100-year-old house. It's what I'm sitting in now. This is my house hack here. But it's a 100-year-old house, was gutted to the studs in 2015 with all the correct permits. It was just done really well. And the value in this area was just extremely solid, and we knew it would rise quickly. And we just started thinking, we had bought this other house hack in around, I think it was around the 500,000 range price point, and this one was a little bit over $1 million range. So it was a leap for us to get into this price point. The house hacking helped us. It has a unit next door that we midterm rent to make the numbers work. and it's in a premium area where people in film and television typically want to be. So we knew we could get good rent, and it was already done. As a designer, I like my heart wanted to like do some work, but I was like, this is perfect. The seller was really eager to get rid of it. They had just dropped the price like $150,000, and we were the first people to look at it after the price drop, and we knew if we lived in it, we could make it work. So we just said we'd been in our other house hack for like a year and a half, and we left and moved to this one unexpectedly out of the blue just because of the quality of the property and the location. Helped us avoid buying a second car. We could ride our bikes everywhere. We could walk to the grocery. It was a lifestyle change as well. Kind of for like our health to get out of the house more and to know confidently that we would never have to buy another car. We could always just have one. So it was multiple things going on in our head then. So we bought this other house hack, and I'm getting to the part where we sell these houses, Chad. Sorry, this is a
No,
long
this is
story
great.
here.
Well, I love the whole
Um,
walkable, bikeable part because that's just like I orient
yes,
my whole life around that. So that's perfect.
yes. And the sustainability stuff is really important to me and our family as well. So again, this all goes back to knowing your why, knowing who you are, knowing what's important to you and your family. Like if you can sit down with your partner and talk about that, that is so important to be on the same page with your partner about understanding your why for your family too. It's just imperative to me. Um, so we're in our second house hack now. We have the unit churning income. And then I start to think some kind of light bulb goes off when we buy this house in October 22, I think. And I said, wow, I have this $500,000 house over here and I have this $1 million house over here. The roofs cost the same to replace. So do the toilets. So does all the maintenance. But the difference is this $1 million house generates a lot more income than the $500,000 house in the sense that, like, if it makes $1,000 over all my expenses here, the other one makes like $500 over my expenses there. I just started thinking, wow, if I could own $4 million properties and just have four roofs, get all of those paid down, and the cash flow on them is going to be substantially higher. The total gross income on this will be around 7,000 a month, and the gross income on the other one is going to be around 5,000 a month, I think. Gross revenue, I'm sorry, total revenue. So when they're paid off, this house will actually cost less for me to maintain because the cash flow on it once the loan is paid off will be way higher than the $500,000 duplex down the street. So that got me thinking, well, what if I just started selling all the little properties in Kentucky to buy another $1 million property here in Atlanta? It'd be like a 3 or 4 for 1 kind of thing. But that's what I was thinking was, well, I'll just 1031 exchange, you know, 4 duplexes in Kentucky for 1 duplex in Atlanta. The cash flow will be the same when the loans are paid down. It's just it has one roof and it has 3 toilets instead of 3 roofs and 15 toilets to break. So then I just started thinking about CapEx in that way.
Mm.
That was a different kind of light bulb for me.
Yeah, and we looked at the spreadsheet and saw how, and I've done the same thing. You look at all the capital expenses you have on your rental properties, and especially the lower price, older properties, lower price you go. I mean, it's surprising the cash flow swings that come when you have a lot of roofs, a lot of heating. I'd had a
Yes.
$13,000 heating and air bill this morning that I was telling you about. So I mean, it happens.
Yeah, and it costs the same whether you have $100,000 house or $500,000 house in the same general region. There's discrepancies
Mm.
state by state and whatnot, but that air conditioning has a range of cost, and it costs the same on $1 million house or $100,000 house. The air still costs $10,000 to replace. So that just was like, wow, capex is going to be covered way more easily on these more expensive properties. Is what I was thinking. Because if I have to spend 10 grand on an air conditioner for $100,000 house, that kills my cash flow for 2, 3 years, if there's a
Mm-hmm.
loan on it. So that was my light bulb when we bought this duplex. And then my light bulb in the fall when I joined your circle group on rental property mastery, which has been really wonderful. Um, I just had that hot seat with you and started prepping for that. And I took one of your spreadsheets there and I started looking at the past 5 year runway on these properties, saying, okay, what's happened with every single property, like down to every single line item? What CapEx have I done? And then I kind of inverted it and started flipping it to the future and saying, what's coming next for everything? I want to write down all the CapEx I see coming for every property I own and see what's coming down the line for my future on these. It doesn't have to surprise me. It doesn't have to come out of the blue. Because I was sitting there thinking, well, I can sell a couple Kentucky properties and buy something else, but how do I decide what to sell? And as soon as I took that spreadsheet of yours and kind of inverted it to the future, I sat down to chat with you about what I was going to sell. And I was like, well, I already know what I'm going to sell. It's here in black and white what I'm going to sell, and some of it had to do with the prediction of what's going on in the locations of where they are. But a lot of it had to do with CapEx for me. CapEx seemed to be the thing that was going to just surprise everybody out of the blue. I feel like CapEx is the one thing people don't do right in their numbers. And it's
Yes.
it's one of the most detrimental things you can do to yourself because it's so expensive. That's one
Yep.
of your biggest issues is, replacing a roof or HVAC or any of those big items. If you don't see that coming, it can kill your whole plan on paper. The paper is nothing to you if you can't put the CapEx down and factor it in, right?
Right.
Um, so that for me was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to sell these two properties because this one needs a new roof and it's going to kill my cash flow for the next 2 years. And then another one was actually our short term rental up in the North Georgia mountains that we had. Um, it was an older house and it needed HVAC and a couple other big things. And it was realistically only cash flowing me for a short term rental. It felt small. It was like $1,000 a month. And it was taking up the most of my time. And time was becoming very valuable to me. In the fall of last year, part of the reason I joined your mastery group was because I just felt my time just getting sucked away in the day to day of managing everything. And I was really struggling and my hours were moving into like 40, 50 hours a week. And I just said, this is where I was before. It's time to stop
Right.
and figure something else out. So I thought I was going to 1031 exchange a couple of properties into something else. And then I got to sitting with my husband in a meeting of the minds. We do meeting of the minds a lot, he and I, about finances and stuff. So we're on the same page. And he said, well, we're spending a lot of money on interest on the house hack we just bought because we bought it at the end of 22 and the interest rates were like the mid sixes then, APR. So we were sitting in this house hack paying, is $1 million house hack, paying around $50,000 a year in interest on this thing. And we just thought, why would we buy another house when we can pay down this loan and recast it, which recasting has not been very popular the last few years. Everyone's doing refinancing, but the recasting is where you do a lump sum payment on the loan and nothing else changes about the loan other than the monthly payments. So your amortization time, if you had 28 years left on the loan, you still have 28 years left on the loan. And then your taxes and insurance stay the same if you have PITI all in there. And then your monthly payment gets reduced with a lump sum. And sometimes they charge you a small fee to do that, but it's typically not as much as a refinance as well, historically. Refinances now you can sometimes get on the house, but that hasn't historically been the case. So we decided instead of a 1031 exchange to save me probably 10 to 15 hours a week on running a short-term rental business on a weekend heavy rental, and then taking some cash from another property that had doubled in value in 5 years. The first property we ever bought, we sold for twice what we bought it for 5 years ago in 2017, with the same tenants in place.
Amazing.
Yes. Actually, one moved out and we renovated that side a little bit. And then we sold it. So we took that money from those two properties and paid down our house hack loan a little bit to where that payment got reduced by around $3,000 a month. That was higher than the cash flow we were making on those other two properties month to month. And we were no longer, and we just saved a lot of money and interest that was just going out the door to the lender. So for us, it was like, okay, we can continue to leverage. We can build this up and do some more. But realistically speaking, my husband had some risk with some job layoffs at his company and things. So we were just feeling a little nervous there too. So we just said, well, let's just pay this debt down, and the cash flow actually will be the same. And I'm going to get back 10 to 15 hours a week of my time to do something else. So that time value in and of itself, know how much your hourly is worth. You can calculate it like that too. You get hours back in the day. How much is that worth to you? What's your hourly worth? So we thought about it in that way too.
Thank you for sharing all the details of that story. Getting to see it on the inside, I found it really educational, informative, and it to me is one of the best examples. Something I wrote about in the Small Mighty Real Estate Investor, and thank you for having that in the background there as well. In the book, I talk a lot about the seasonality of a real estate investor. How you begin as a starter, like you buying your first property in Kentucky, then you move into this builder phase where you're leveraging and growing, and you're just trying to get that little amount of money you have into a bigger amount of money. But I find in the real estate world, the harvester phase, that third phase, is the one that's talked about the least. And if it's talked about, it's usually like, well, 30 years from now, eventually I'll live off my rental properties. But it's just kind of this fuzzy idea in the future. But what I think you and Eric have done, and what you're demonstrating so nicely in this story, is that it's not just something you do when you're the end of your life, when you retire. This is like a cyclical thing that you can do every 3 to 5 years, every 10 years, where you basically like harvest your existing portfolio to live your life that you set out to live in the first place. Like 7 years ago, when you were in your job, saying, I want to have a more balanced life. I want to spend more time with my kid. I want to have, do something that's more interesting to me. Like this move you made, in addition to all the other moves you made before, this move of recasting your mortgage, of not doing the traditional thing of doing a 1031 exchange and buying more properties, which more, that's what you're supposed to be doing as a real estate investor. Like you got off the treadmill, not permanently, but just
Right.
temporarily. And now you have this space in your life to still grow if you want to take a break if you want to. I just think it's such a cool example of what's possible as a real estate investor.
Yes, and I think it's really important to take that minute because you will gain so much perspective in the quiet moments of your life if you can build them in. And it's a real privilege to be able to build that into your life.
Yeah.
But we're finding that the best part about owning real estate isn't what comes when we're 60 or what comes when we're 45, when we plan to pull my husband out of his job or whatever it is. It's like, how could he's still working his W-2, and that's okay. It's okay right now because he's negotiated a good amount of time off too, but we can do a balance. It's like, how can we still make this work and give ourselves a little bit right now, a little taste, because our daughter's only little for so long. We don't want to work through her whole childhood if we don't have to. If we can take do some sprints with her one on one, and just, I tell my friends right now, I'm going to have my stay at home mom summer. Do I want to be a stay at home mom all the time? It's not really for me. It's great for people who do it and love it. It's not how I'm fulfilled 100% every day. Do I want to do it for a couple months this summer with my daughter? Yes, I do. And I'm very hyper aware of that. I want to be with her this summer and I want to spend that time. And then in the fall, I'm planning to, pick back up, and I already have my plan, of what I'm going to do next with the real estate portfolio. So it's just kind of giving yourself, making that plan and reevaluating it all the time, because your goals and values, they shift as your life shifts, and that's okay. When we started real estate investing, on day one, my goal was to buy 10 properties for our retirement and you know, cash flow them then. And we were going to work forever. That was the goal then. Um, And then it just shifted, and things shift, and your goals shift, and what you need to get done. If you have a sick parent, your goals are going to shift. If you have, um, you know, kids and grandparents to take care of at the same time, your goals are going to shift. Um, and that's another reason we do the house hacking. If we have to have parents come live with us, they go in the apartment next door. That's what we're going to do. But one of the things real estate does is it gives you that flexibility in life to do what you need to do when you need to do it. If we want to move out of this house hack and rent it out tomorrow, we can do that. The numbers work, and that is the beauty of it. If we find a single family home we just absolutely love and want to have, want to spend our money on every month, then we'll go do that tomorrow because we can rent this out tomorrow. And that's the beauty of it, right? Is the flexibility. And I think you have to be willing to make a little bit of weird tweaks and adjustments in your life to make that happen. Like we have an apartment with a tenant next door. We share walls with them. Not everybody is into that. Not everybody can do that with kids either. So there's a little bit of sacrifice happening too, but at the end of the day, it makes our life better, and we have choices.
Yeah, the choices, the options. It reminds me, a friend of mine who's also a podcaster, Paula Pant, always says that you can afford anything. You just can't afford everything, and you always have these trade-offs. So you're choosing to have somebody next door to you, which for some people that'd be a non-starter.
Yes.
But when you've had these conversations, you and Eric, and you've looked at the time you have with your daughter, when you look at where you get to live, the walkability, all those things that are important to you, and everybody has their own list, right? But
Yes, they
you,
do.
by choosing that first, you then use the tools of real estate finance. Financial independence is not just like this permanent state that everybody gets to. It's this kind of evolving choices and tools that you have, which you've chosen to use in a certain way. And that's what's so cool, is that everybody's got a different path. And this is your path. This is what you've chosen to do.
Yes, and I think you really just have to keep that tight grasp on your why. I get with people in here, they're like, I want to buy an investment property. What should I do? What should I buy? And I'm like, well, that's such a loaded question. You really have to think about who you are, what's important to you, what are you going to do with it? What do you need it to do for you in 5 years? And if you can't think about those things, you're going to be lost in this chaos of all of options. You know, um, and like we thought we wanted to do short-term rentals. Guess what? We tried it. It's too busy for us. We said,
Yeah.
maybe not.
Yep.
Um, but but also don't let that hold you back from doing anything. Go and do something is the goal too, right?
Yep.
Because you can't just stand on the sidelines and wait, for the next golden opportunity, because the golden opportunity was yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't steer a parked car. You got to get this real estate car in motion, and I can't wait to see the next steps of your career. And I have confidence that whatever it is, it's going to be very thoughtful and it's going to be fun. I would love for you, if you don't mind, just people are listening to this, they're going to be at different parts of their journey: starters, wealth builders, people in the harvester phase. If you had to speak to those people listening who are also looking to achieve some sort of, we can call it financial independence, but also just more life flexibility, like you're talking about, more options. Do you have any advice you'd give them just to help them with their own journey?
Yeah, I think digging deep and knowing your why is really going to be your biggest driver for this. You can start businesses, you can be an entrepreneur, you can buy real estate, you can do all of these things. Um, and that isn't the meaningful part to me. The meaningful part is your why, and sometimes that can get lost. So just making sure that you're always revisiting that. And if you have a partner or somebody you're with doing life together, understand their why too, and making sure that both of you have that continuity, at least at some level, because that's what's going to drive you both forward throughout all the seasons in your life. You have to have that continuity, even if it's just within yourself. Thinking about the future can feel really challenging sometimes, but that's how you understand what to do today a little bit too. And then giving yourself that time today to make steps towards that future that you want, because you're the only one who has any control over that. You can create your own destiny. It may not be the smoothest, fastest, easiest, get rich quick journey, But money isn't always the solution. You have to know your why and understand some goalposts for you to get there. So that is my 2 cents. And there's a million ways to get there. Just try something and stick with it. Like Gary Keller's one bridge thing, the one thing, that's always stuck with me and my husband. We always talk about that. What's the one thing that's going to get us where we want the fastest? If you're creating 3 different businesses or 3 different ways to make money, and you make one little step on that each bridge, you're just getting a little bit every time. But if you just have one and you do a little step every time, you're going to cross a lot faster.
Yeah, there's a productivity and focus. Sometimes you think when you take things away, you talked about going from multiple properties to 3 or 4 properties. Every time I tell people that with a small and mighty investor, they're like, oh, you're kind of playing small. You're doing things no, exactly. It depends on what you're shooting for. It depends on what big means to you. And so I just really appreciate your example, what you're doing with your life and sharing your story, letting me share it with everybody. If people want to, you're a real estate agent, you're an investor. I know you have some presence online too. I'm going to put links to anything you share with us here in the podcast show notes, the YouTube show notes. But if people were to connect with you afterwards, Emily, like where can they find you? Where can they follow along with you?
Yeah, probably the best 2 places are they can find me on Instagram at Emily in Real Estate. It's emily.in.realestate. Or on my LinkedIn, it's just LinkedIn, Emily Beatty. So find me there, hit me up. Would love to help anybody out here in Atlanta too. So I'm here in Midtown, hanging out in my house hack.
Yes, and you know the market. You just sent me a lead on one that I wasn't able to follow through on, but in my town of College Park, where I went to high school, you had a really interesting lead, and so you got your hands on a lot of cool stuff going on in Atlanta, and you know the market, and people should definitely reach out to you if they're interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here in Atlanta. It's a good time down here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Emily, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chad, for having me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. In this episode, you heard the story of how Emily replaced her job salary with rental properties. But what we didn't get into is all the nitty-gritty numbers and the analysis of how you can actually do that with rental properties. So in my next video, how to replace a $90,000 per year salary with real estate cash flow, I go into all the step-by-step details about how to do that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can click on the thumbnail above me here, or you can click on the link in the podcast or the YouTube description below. I'll see you in the next video.